our webinar. I'm Larissa Salvato. I'm part of the marketing department here at Align Org Solutions. I'll just kick it off with a couple of housekeeping items. Our webinar is going to be recorded and we will send a copy out to all attendees. We encourage Q&A throughout the presentation. Please use the Q&A function and we'll make sure those questions get answered. And with that, I will kick it off to Dallin and Rochelle, who just authored our most recent executive guide, Designing AI into Your Operating Model. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Larissa. And really glad that everybody could join us today. When we think about AI, today, I think most executives' conversations are still around efficiency. Questions like, where can we automate and what roles can we eliminate? And so leaders are focused on cost and they're focused on speed. And that makes a lot of sense. But it's pretty rare to find organizations, and I think Dallin and I found this in our most recent conversations at some of our conferences, that it's rare to find organizations that are really thinking more transformatively and really focused on that effectiveness piece, or thinking more expansively about new ways that AI might actually differentiate the business or open up new opportunities. And the truth is that's not easy, right? There's a ton of enthusiasm, but there's also a lot of uncertainty. So everybody's trying to move fast, but they also realize that plugging in AI tools doesn't just automatically make you more effective as an organization. So sometimes it's actually just adding noise. And one of the studies actually that Dallin and I came across as we were working on this guide was citing that 55% of leaders who made AI-driven redundancies later said that they regretted those decisions. So 55% of leaders who made redundancies, so in other words, eliminated positions, said that they regretted that decision. So that's really interesting because they are discovering that the issue isn't really about the people or replacing the people. The issue is about how we're designing work and designing AI into the process and into the operating model. So if you think about it, that's a really powerful signal that the next phase of AI adoption is really going to be about integration and design. It's not just going to be about automation. It's going to be, how do we integrate AI? How do we design around AI to be most effective in the system? So that's what we're going to unpack today. We'll start with why AI really demands that strategic design. So basically, why isn't this just about deploying an AI tool? Why it's about rethinking how your system is working as a whole. And then we're going to move into how AI is changing work and roles and how to go about that process. So Dallin's going to walk us through how the introduction of AI really starts to shift things like accountability and work activities and motivation. So he'll talk us through how to approach that. And then after that, we're going to connect the dots across the whole organization. So we're going to talk about what it takes to really align the entire system so that AI actually strengthens your strategy instead of fragmenting it. And we'll talk about why that's different than your traditional sort of technology implementation. And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A and hopefully some really practical ways that you can start applying that thinking into your own organization. So why does AI demand a more strategic design? When we start talking about AI, right now, most people are obviously focused on AI as a technology system. They're focused on these technology aspects like the models and the data and the automation. They work with their technology team and they see it as a technology implementation, which of course it is, but in practice, even the smallest AI effort So maybe it's a chat bot or a forecasting tool, maybe document review. It's setting off this ripple effect across the entire organization. So for example, think about like a marketing pilot and how that can change the way that content gets reviewed and approved across the entire organization, or maybe uh, a finance AI model can reshape how teams actually plan their finances or their budgets. I've definitely seen things like customer support models changing the way that organizations are actually handling customer issues. So it's not just about the technology that's being leveraged or automating that process. It's about how do we go about this process of addressing what our customers need. So it really starts to redefine the way that we operate. So pretty soon you've changed things like workflows, you've changed decision rights, you've changed how we measure things, you've changed even things like the culture, sometimes without necessarily even realizing that you're doing it. It just kind of ripples almost accidentally across the entire system. So that's why we say AI doesn't stay local. And you'll see that in the guide over and over. AI doesn't stay local. It doesn't neatly just sit in one function or in one process. So even if you are implementing it within one space, you're going to see that ripple effect across the entire organization. And I think this line on the slide captures it really perfectly, that even small AI efforts set off ripple effects of change, many that organizations hadn't fully anticipated. So the trick is anticipating those and keeping the system in alignment. And that's been true in almost every organization that we've seen, the clients that we work with. The technology usually works, but the organization isn't always ready for what it changes across the organization. So in other words, AI spreads and it touches everything. And we have a choice to either let that happen by accident or to design that into the system. So why does that happen? Larissa, if you could go back one more slide again, I'll just kind of talk through why does that happen? Why do we see that? I think we need to go back a couple. Oh, sorry, Larissa, threw you off. But why does that happen? There's three key reasons that we see this again and again with clients. So the first reason is really about how AI is central to the business operations. So it's not just this experiment. Maybe that's what it used to be. It used to be more of a side experiment sitting in IT or analytics. But now it's really becoming embedded in how we run the business and central to our operating model. So when something becomes that central to the organization, it has to be designed into the system and how we operate. It's not just bolted on to the system. And secondly, without design, without that intentional operational design, AI creates fragmentation across the system. So when teams are experimenting in silos, they're testing out different ways of utilizing AI. You get different tools, you get inconsistent data, you get blurring of accountabilities, and you get confusion about who is actually in charge of decisions, who owns information, who owns decisions at the end of the day. And without a plan, AI adds friction instead of adding value to the organization. So that's where you get some of that noise. And then third, strategies still matter more than the technology. And I think this is the biggest one that people miss. It's that the AI isn't going to change your strategy. It's going to amplify the strategy that's already there. So if your organization is aligned, your strategy is clear, AI is going to strengthen that existence of alignment. But if your organization is misaligned and it's fragmented, then AI is going to magnify that instead. And so in other words, the real differentiator isn't who has the best AI, It's who has the clearest strategy and the most alignment within their operating model. So I'm going to say that again. The real differentiator is not who has the best AI, it's who has the clearest strategy and the most alignment within their operating model. So in other words, the organizations that get the most value from AI are the ones that know what they're trying to reinforce and why they're trying to reinforce that. They've got a clear direction. They've got clear alignment of their model around their strategy. So as we go through our conversation today, what I would encourage you to do or to think about is less about where AI fits into your organization and more about what it is that you want to amplify about your organization. So that brings us to how we think about integration and this amplification of strategy. Because once we understand the strategy, then we can really look into this idea of the cube model. So many of you have probably seen the cube model, hopefully. So we use this because it's just a simple but really powerful way to visualize how organizations work as a system. So if you imagine the organization like a Rubik's Cube, each side is representing a different part of that organizational model. So things like work and structure and governance, people and rewards, leadership and culture, information and metrics, continuous alignment. These are how the system adapts and learns over time. And if you start to change one side of the cube, you essentially are scrambling the other sides. So we talk a lot about how do we keep the organization or the cube in alignment across the system. So you might, with AI, start automating a workflow, but suddenly the roles start to shift, or the accountability starts to get blurry, or the metrics don't fit together. The culture feels different. So AI starts to change in one part of the system, but it scrambles all the rest of the sides of the cube. So the work of leadership and the work of AI design is to rebalance that cube and to intentionally align all the sides of the system so that we maintain that coherence with AI in the mix. So that's what we mean when we say that AI integration is a design challenge. It's not a technology challenge. We really see it as a design challenge, an operating model challenge. Because it's not about where you deploy it, it's about how you redesign the system around it. So that's what we're going to dig in deeper into today. So when we think about AI and the impact that it has on roles, that's the lens that we use. We use that organizational cube. And we talk about how AI shouldn't just replace work. It should redefine the goals that you have and how you think about that. So we think about this on 3 different levels. So first is optimization. So this is where most organizations are focused today because this is really about efficiency. This is about automation. It's really foundational, automating repeatable tasks, and doing the same work faster and cheaper within the organization. But that second level is transformative. That's where you redesign workflows and roles around AI. You're designing it into the system and you're thinking about effectiveness. So not just gaining efficiency, but how do we get more effective at what we do and how we deliver it? And you start to think about how decisions are made, how teams are structured with AI in the mix. So you're not just adding AI, you're rebuilding the way that work gets done. And then lastly, that third level is what we call expansion. It's where the actual strategy begins to evolve with AI really being kind of central in offering new ways to think about differentiation. So differentiation can happen using AI to unlock entirely new capabilities that weren't necessarily possible before. So it may shift the value proposition or even new business models within the organization. So we think about it on those 3 levels, but there's a catch. So if you're not deliberate about how you redesign roles, you can end up with what we call the half-empty job problem. So that's where AI takes over most of the interesting work, or it really just starts to fragment the work, and then what's left for people ends up feeling less purposeful, or at the organization level starts to feel really fragmented. And obviously that's exactly what we want to avoid. So I'm going to hand it over to Dellen to take us deeper into how we actually avoid that problem.
Excellent.
Dellen, how
Thanks
do we do that?
Yeah, thanks, Rochelle. Before we get there, we actually wanted to pose a question to you all that are attending this webinar and get a sense of how are you seeing AI initiatives showing up in your organization? What has been really the primary strategic goal? Is it around optimization? Is it around transformation? Or is it really around expansion? So Larissa, if you could go ahead and deploy the survey. And just to recap is, optimization is really around efficiency. Are you just trying to do things cheaper, quicker, faster? Transformation really being around effectiveness. Are we trying to really transform how we currently deliver value, or is it really around expansion, finding new ways to productize and broaden our commercial possibilities or commercial potential? And it might be a number of these things all together. So please go ahead and pick multiple choices, and we'll leave the survey open for a couple seconds, and then we'll see just how AI is showing up for those of you that are here with us. And we'd have a question that I'll address. Can you try to be more than one at once? Absolutely. You can try to be more than one at once. And I find that, or we are finding that enterprises, of course, are trying to do all three at once. I think the important distinction is how can you be intentional about where in the organization are you leveraging or trying to do more optimization type of AI interventions versus more transformation versus more expansion. So some general functions that we might see is really around optimization is going to be your cost centers. So we see lots of enabling functions really focused on how can we do more with less versus more transformation. I might see more operations functions saying, how can we deliver value in a more effective way? And then, of course, you have more product and commercial organizations really thinking about expansion. What other opportunities are we not tapping into with AI? So absolutely, we see all three of these really exist in organizations. The magic really comes in how can we be intentional as an enterprise and how we go about each three of these areas within our organization. So we can go ahead and close the poll here. Let's see. So, okay, by no surprise, we're seeing 80% 80% of the weight around efficiency. And this is exactly lines up with our experience in our conversations with clients as well as prospects. That really the name of the game, this especially this year, is how can we do more with less? And what is a typical lever that leaders often pull in order to get some efficiency, to get some cost outs, is we just jump right into what roles, what jobs can we eliminate? And of course, AI being at the center of a lot of those conversations as a true enabler to be able to do that. So let's go ahead and talk about how might we think about taking a couple steps back before jumping straight into what roles, what jobs can AI replace. And how we do this is really we want to focus from a point of work. And how we might think about this a little bit differently is just unpacking what even is a job in itself. A job is a container of activities and decisions and accountabilities and responsibilities. And oftentimes, if we jump to straight to changing jobs, we might have some unintended consequences in as it relates to how we work and how we deliver value. So you really cannot design the right jobs until you've designed the right work. And I'll share a quick story conversation I was having with a prospect client just last week in the energy industry, and she was mentioning that one of her core functions in her organization just recently went through a big initiative, paid a pretty penny to get some benchmarks of what all the other big organizations in their field were doing. How were they leveraging AI? What jobs were they really taking advantage of to unlock and get some more streamlined resources and work? And ultimately, they got a lot of really pretty slides from some of the usual suspect big house consulting firms that was giving some really great benchmarks. And ultimately, they what followed was a round of layoffs, right? They ended up letting go of people because they thought that, hey, these were all the other organizations that we're competing with. This is how they're deploying AI, and these are the specific jobs that we felt or that they felt met the remit of efficiency. And what came was a full round of unintended consequences, such as confusion in roles, decision rights, and ultimately one of the most interesting things was actually it was a surge of more overloaded feeling for those that remained because they had to pick up the pieces of just some of the misalignments that came with some of the decisions that were driven by these benchmarks. And how we might avoid these AI-based role changes is really to start from a place of what is the work that you need. And you cannot design effective roles until you've really designed the work itself. So how do we go about that? What is the real process? What is the real process to go about it? Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. And one tool that we use to help kind of ground our conversation around work is the idea, this concept around value stream mapping. So value stream mapping is really an end-to-end flow of work, really to articulate how do we create value as an organization. And I'll say this tongue in cheek, the first step to seeing where AI can take place in your organization is actually not thinking about AI or roles or jobs at first. It's really just thinking about how do we need to create value as an organization. Only then can we start to assess how might we want to influence our work through the lens of AI. So in this example, we are using the example of a project execution organization. Very simply, how they create or how they create value is they create a project plan, they approve funding, they execute the project, and they commission the project. And they have a subset of activities that follow within these four major steps. At this point in time, it's really important that we're completely agnostic of who does what, or if it's a person or if it's a technology. We really just want to focus on what is the work that we need in the organization. Okay. Are there any questions as we start to transition from moving away from just jumping to roles and really starting to take a step backwards to assessing what what work do we need in the organization and how do we actually need to create value? Is there any QA? Excellent. Why we like to keep it agnostic is it's super helpful to remove some of the names, how we feel work might need to remain, and it's how we try to separate some of the biasness from our work activities. Because again, if you think about ourselves, we are just containers of activities and decisions. So really just putting it out on a value stream map helps us to unpack it. So how might we now bring an element of um, AI into the conversation? And we think about analyzing the different work activities that we have. It's really this continuum and spectrum of AI integration. It's not about how might we leverage, it's not about where or is AI right for our organization. It's really how much. So we think about this through a continuum of really light AI integration being from an assist point of view. It's helping with routine tasks all the way down to the most in-depth usage of AI and super integrated AI, which is agentization, right? AI is able to pick up and independently work on complex tasks with very minimal human oversight, and really the range of things that happen in between that. So rolling in this model can help us start to assess our work a little bit differently. Is what level is right as we think about our work. And Larissa, if you don't mind teeing up our next survey, we're interested in hearing to what extent are you seeing these forms of AI being utilized in your own organizations? It would be nice to just see just kind of a scale of 1 to 5. Are we really leveraging, this assist mechanism in our organizations? Are we using augmented forms of AI integration, or are we going all the way to the extent of agentization? So I'll give everyone a couple minutes to answer this for yourselves, and this could be related to your own team, but it could also be related to your organization as well. And I see a question. So is the recommendation to do this before you start looking at AI options? I would say absolutely. The idea is let's focus on our work first before we start looking at our AI options. And we'll roll this in, and I'll make sure we touch on this question again as we get to our next set of content, and tying the dots between this AI assessment of our work back into our example. Great. We'll just give another minute to have so everyone get those responses in. I know it's a little bit more of a lengthy poll. And selfishly, I think this is really, really interesting data for us just to see in reality how are people really leveraging these different types of modalities for AI. Part of the art of influencing change and transformation in the organization is that continuous thread back to our strategy. What are we really looking to achieve through our AI initiatives and our AI efforts? And this range is really meant to help with some of those choices downstream of if we are looking to really truly transform how we're working, we might actually need some more in-depth AI integration within these ranges. So Larissa, if you don't mind, if you could go ahead and close the poll, I'd like to see what our results are, and let's talk about them. Okay. So as I look to our assist, I see lots, probably more than half of the responses are starting to fully integrate, or be on the higher scale of integration for assistant. By no surprise, as we go further down the list, there's not a ton of leveraging or fully integration of our deeper forms of AI, such as agentization and automation. So I would say that over the past couple months, we've been seeing more and more from our clients the desire to actually go towards more automation and agentization, not just some of the lighter patterns of AI, which is assisting and augmenting. So super interesting data for us. I believe we'll be able to send out what we just pulled to you all after this as well, so you can have some of that data set to bring back to your teams. Okay. Let's go ahead and connect a couple of these conversations together. So now that we have a model to look at and assess our work through the lens of AI, now we can actually start to map out or see how that shows up in our work processes. So our value stream map. So you could take this step by step, really assessing as you start to look through step one of creating a project plan is how in depth do we need to leverage AI, and what is the right spectrum, or what is the right point on the spectrum for us to have AI be fully involved? And in this instance, I think we're using this example as we really wanted to transform how we work and really gain some efficiency within this project execution organization. So we really want to use some deeper AI integration forms, such as agentization and automation. However, there are absolutely some still tasks within our process that we don't want AI to be fully engaged in, such as defining our project scopes, maybe reviewing and approving our budgets. We feel like we need to maybe have that be more human-led rather than AI-led. So really, this is now tying our two conversations together for how we can start to make some choices on where to explore AI utilization. So redesigning the actual flow of work, not just the tools, so human and AI contributions are clear, intentional, and sequenced is really critical here. So the goal is to match the right actor, human, AI, to each task based on its strategic value. And this is how we can think more intentionally about where AI should take place within how we need to create value as an organization. So hopefully that answered your Q&A question, whoever asked that anonymously. Now I'll go ahead and pause here again. Are there any questions as we start to map out AI, the spectrum of AI back into our work? Nope, I do not see any. Excellent. So let's continue then. Now we can really start to assess how might we begin creating jobs around AI. And what do we say about jobs? They're really just containers. It's really boundaries around work activities. So in this example, we started to create we started to create two different types of jobs. One being AI co-pilot, so really a human-led job, this being the project manager. So taking the tasks that we have in our value stream and starting to put boundaries around all of the tasks that we really want more just automated as well as some human tasks. And this is really more of a human-led project manager. But we also articulated the need and desire to have maybe more agentized roles within our organization. And therefore, we might have more AI-led jobs. So this is really AI leading the core task, and humans are really there to help facilitate and organize and be an accountable party for a lot of the work that happens there that you can see is taking form as the project aid. So instead of using benchmarks to tell us what roles you might need to change, we really see this as the core for making sure that we don't have downstream unintended consequences for integrating AI into our operating model. So how organizations create value should be your primary driver for how you make specific job changes as it relates to AI integration. Okay. So role design balances strategic goals with time and cost savings. It's all a balance. What we're seeing right now is a lot of that is in order to save SG&A costs, organizations are coming in and saying, hey, we need to replace these list of jobs because this is what the benchmark is saying that AI can replace these ones. However, that is having lots of ramifications and how we actually deliver work and how we need to actually operate as an organization. And only when we start to assess our own uniqueness and our processes and how we deliver value against where AI opportunities are, only then can we actually intentionally design AI thoughtfully and systematically into our organization. Now I see there is a question. Can process maps be leveraged? Absolutely. Process maps can definitely be leveraged. For us, we like to start at the value stream level because it's very high level. You can start to get into some of the nitty-gritty details within the process map and really at our level of value stream, where we really do not care too much about the time cycles or anything like that. So those of you that are familiar with doing kind of process mapping or value stream mapping as it relates to more kind of Scrum and Agile development teams, we're taking this a little bit higher level. So we believe that at a high level, it's best to have a lot more of those AI types of conversations, but you can absolutely have the same conversations at a more detailed process map conversation. The trick is starting to remove who does what at the very start, because I think as we start to do more process mapping, we're really keen on who does what at first. But I think that's more of a secondary question, less leading with who does what. So really just focusing on how is it that we do need to create value in the first place. Okay, so just continuing on, what does this really mean for our roles? And we're seeing three different role archetypes start to emerge. First being human-led, AI-supported roles. So humans really taking the lead. This is really supported by AI through more assistant types of levers with speed, with insight, helping with consistency. Then we're also seeing AI-led roles. So really humans are supporting on the back end, really there for quality, for oversight, and for edge cases. And then we're really seeing either fully human or fully AI, fully um, agentized roles in these organizations. And the goal, and I think Rochelle did a really great job teeing this up earlier, is to make sure that we are intentional about any role changes that we're making. Is this meant to be purely human-led, or is this really meant to be AI-led? This is where we're seeing lots of inconsistencies, lots of pain in organizations where it's really unclear of, hey, we just made a big investment and change in our organization to have more AI agents and to have more AI type of hybrid roles. However, we're not really clear is what is the true intent? Are we really here as an AI facilitator, or are we really here as a human-led supported by some of our AI tools and technology? One story I will share here with a client I'm working with, big medtech organization within their digital R&D organization, and they started to play with the idea of having three different types of leaders. One leader archetype, which is around leading human-led people, okay, internally, purely human-led people supported by AI that are purely internal. So this is going to be your typical archetype that we know today. Secondarily, they would have a human-led external party. So how we manage our contractors and anything that's external from our internal team. And then lastly, an AI leader. So a leader in charge of managing all the different agents that we have in the organizations, or really the AI-led roles. And if we think about the different archetypes and what it means to lead these different types of teams, it's truly a different way. And Rochelle will talk a little bit more about that as we think about all the different cascading of choices that need alignment as we start to implement these different types of roles within our own organizations. So moving on, just to start to tie a bow on everything that we've covered so far. Um, we firmly believe that you can't just jump straight into what roles is AI replacing, but you have to start from a place of strategy. What is the true strategic intent? What are we really trying to drive and strive for? Then we can start to assess what is the work that we need? How is it that we need to create value? And then we can start to roll in at what level and what depth can we start to influence and change how we work through AI? And then ultimately, what are the roles that we need in our organization? We firmly believe that strategy drives the work and work drives the structure, and nothing fundamentally will change unless you change the work. Um, on top of that, of course, are a number of other types of organizational choices that are needed to be reinforced around some of these big, broad strategic changes as we think about AI. So, Rochelle, if you don't mind going ahead and taking the ball from here and walking us
Yeah,
through that.
absolutely. So if you think back to where we started, we were talking about how even small AI pilots, implementations in one pocket or another within the system are creating ripples throughout the system. And this is where those ripples start to show up. So it's in the way you govern, the way that you reward your employees, it's how you measure, it's how you adapt um, to the shifts in technology and the shifts in strategy. So now we're circling back to this original idea of what we called design coherence or alignment. So it's the need to rebalance the cube when AI is shuffling one of those sides, one of those aspects of the work that we do. So let's walk through a few examples of what that looks like around the cube. So first, let's talk about structure and governance. So Dylan really started to touch on this as he's talking about roles and how redesigning the work or rethinking the work is really restructuring and rethinking through the roles. But this is where the accountability can start to blur. And so what's important here is when the system makes a recommendation, for example, and the human acts on it, who actually owns the outcome? So let's look at an example. Take AI-driven loan underwriting as an example. So from banking, if you're using AI to underwrite your loans, and the algorithm recommends an approval and the human signs off on the approval. If that loan goes bad, who's responsible? So we think about without clear decision rights and ownership, that accountability starts to get really fuzzy, and it can actually erode people's confidence in the entire system. So for executives, the real question isn't who pushes the button on the AI system or in the system or pushes the button for approval. It's where does human judgment actually add value, and where can we truly trust the machine? So it helps to clarify that distinction by role and not just by team or by function, because the governance is tighter that way, and it helps keep execution a lot cleaner. People and rewards, if you think about AI redefining what contribution actually looks like within the organization. So it's actually redefining, how do we define good? How do we describe what good performance really looks like? So in a lot of organizations, the most valuable skills aren't things like speed and volume anymore, because you're getting that from the AI systems. So the most valuable skills are things more like judgment and interpretation and the ability to work effectively with the AI system and provide that human judgment that knows when to accept or when to decline the recommendations from AI. So the leadership question becomes, are we rewarding what really matters in this new world? So if your performance system is still measuring old definitions of outputs and outcomes and performance, then you're teaching people to optimize for what existed in the past instead of rewarding this new reality. Information and metrics. So AI really floods the organization with brand new insights, possibilities, new priorities. And so you're really dealing with this entirely new world of options. And you don't want to be steering that ship with a map that existed yesterday, right? You want the organization to be aiming towards the new performance indicators. So for example, we've seen this working with a global supply chain company where AI-driven forecasting really revealed that the longstanding metrics, like they were using things like fill rate and safety stock, but they were incentivizing the wrong behaviors. And once the KPIs were updated to actually reflect the way that AI provided that predictive accuracy and responsiveness, then the whole system got a lot sharper. And so leaders need to really be asking the question, are our metrics still telling the truth about performance? And are they incentivizing the right thing? And then finally, continuous alignment. So this is the part of the cube that often gets overlooked, because AI is adaptive. It doesn't sit still. It learns, it adapts, it shifts the organization continuously. And the organization has to evolve with that. So that's what makes this particularly critical in this AI-driven world, because that continuous alignment means we're not just looking at alignment as a one-time fix. We also, as an organization, are learning continuously and in this living cycle of revisiting, realigning our organization, and just repeating that alignment as the AI and the business continue to evolve. So alignment is more than a milestone in that perspective. It's this muscle that you're continuing to build. So when we talk about realigning the operating model, that's really what we mean by that. We mean that redesigning every lever of the organization for how work gets done. And leadership and culture is where we'll end. And we end here for a reason, because culture and leadership are what make everything else hold together, obviously. So you can redesign the roles and the workflows and the metrics, but if the leaders aren't reinforcing the right signals and actually shifting what people believe in the organization, then the behavior isn't going to change. So for example, if leaders don't balance that trust with AI, or that trust in AI and the information that it provides with the courage to actually question AI, to mistrust it, to question how to use it, to question the outputs that it provides, then resistance can really settle in. So that's why we say that leadership has to really model the mindset of the future and not just talk about it. So some of those leadership questions underneath are really powerful. Leaders can be asking things like, what signals are we sending? So whether it's intentional or not, what are the signals that we're sending about AI and what that means in our organization? And are we rewarding curiosity? Are we rewarding collaboration? Are we rewarding discernment? How do we create a culture where people feel safe to experiment and challenge the outputs from AI and feel safe to learn together through that process? And how do we model that behavior ourselves as leaders? So this is where we end our tour of the cube, so to speak. And that leadership is really kind of what turns that into reality. So we wanted to share just one last example with you as we bring all of these pieces and sides of the cube together. So where have we seen organizations, clients be really successful in adapting their model and bringing AI into the mix? So let me give you a quick example of what this can look like in practice. One of the clients that we have in the hospitality space, it's a global luxury brand, they were known for delivering just incredibly high touch, personalized, great experiences. So when they introduced AI, they didn't do it just to cut labor or increase their speed. They really asked, how can AI help us deliver on our brand promise even more effectively than we do today? So how can we leverage this to really amplify our distinction within the market? So they ended up using AI-driven personalization to tailor communication and offers that they made based on their guest preferences. And they introduced things like smart concierge tools, so voice assistants and chatbots that made intelligent recommendations based on their customers. And they used things like predictive analytics for staffing and inventory so that the experience really felt more effortless to their guests. So for them, it was far more efficient behind the scenes, but it was also amplifying things that made them distinctive. So the outcome was higher loyalty, better upselling, improved efficiency still was important, but most importantly, it was the guest experience that they delivered. And it really kept them distinctively on brand for who they wanted to be and how they wanted to show up within the market. So that's the kind of alignment that we're talking about, where AI is reinforcing the strategy and it's not distracting from the strategy or creating noise within the organization. So our key takeaways, if I had to sum it up, I would say, to me, AI changes the logic of the system. And I've seen previously where that hasn't been addressed and how those ripples can really disrupt everything. But you can't just drop it into one corner of the business and hope that everything else is going to stay the same. So that to me is where the cube model really helps in the scenario of AI amplification, because it gives you a new way to see how all of those pieces fit together and how they shift when AI enters into the picture. So before we move into questions, just a quick note about our AI guide. Larissa, if you want to pull that up. So if you want to dig deeper into the things that we talked about today, the executive guide is available to download. And you can use the QR code there. It's also on our website, and it walks through the things that we covered today. So you can find that on alignorg.com, or you can just scan the link in the chat.
We'll also send a copy to all attendees as well as a copy of this recording and the slide deck. I know that was one of the questions that was in the Q&A.
Awesome. So Larissa, I'll turn it over to you. I know you've been collecting questions throughout the session. So what's up in the queue?
Yes. Again, if you guys have any questions, you can go ahead and answer that in or ask those in the Q&A using the Q&A function.
And there was a question in the chat that I had addressed, and hopefully everyone's able to see it. But the question was around if an organization doesn't have processes or is in the process of looking at their operating model, but doesn't have clear processes, will an AI-led approach be too challenging? And I would say it absolutely can be. I think what the beauty of actually taking the value stream mapping approach is you can start really from a clean slate of how is it that we need to create value in the future, regardless of how things are currently operating now. And you can start to align and tie in some of your downstream choices and your operating model choices based on that as a foundation, as a catalyst for how you might need to create value differently. So I always think, going back to the work, it's just a really great way to kind of reset what is most important and align all the things downstream, such as our roles, such as how we leverage AI. Again, tying back to our strategy as well, in a new way. So oftentimes we work with organizations that might have lots of processes mapped and value streams mapped already. And as they think about changing and transforming, oftentimes there's a risk of just iterating on that. It's more of the same. It's making horses faster rather than designing for a new car, right? So we want to think broadly and really think as future focused as we can. So really take it as an opportunity to just rethink our work overall. Any other questions? Nabi, I see you had your hand up. I'm not sure if you had an open question that you wanted to put in the chat or if it was already answered, but please feel free to take a moment, or if you can't get it in here, we'd be happy to address it offline as well. So please feel free to reach out. No problem.
Okay, I think we have all questions answered. And with that, we will end the webinar. Thank you so much for attending, and be on the lookout for a link to the guide and the recording in your inbox.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.